Hello, and welcome to this news briefing on global affairs, technology, and geopolitics on Hypeno. This hour in focus, we are exploring how China offers the US real competition in the race for chips as China receives US equipment to make advanced chips despite new rules report. How and why is this happening? Let's find out together. Accordingly, despite a slew of new export restrictions meant to impede developments in the nation's semiconductor industry, a report on Tuesday claimed that Chinese companies are purchasing American chip-making equipment in order to produce cutting-edge semiconductors. The Biden administration's October 2022 export curbs, which aim to prevent Chinese chipmakers from obtaining American chip-making tools if they would be used to manufacture advanced chips at the 14-nanometer node or below, are the target of the 741-page annual report released by the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. Importers are often able to purchase the equipment if they claim it is being used on an older production line. And with limited capacity for end-use inspections, it is difficult to verify the equipment is not being used to produce more advanced chips, the report said, referring to the Commerce Department's use of the 14-nanometer restriction limit. The discovery coincides with the United States' efforts to determine how Huawei, the dominant Chinese telecom company, managed to manufacture an advanced 7-nanometer chip at SMIC, the country's leading chipmaker, in defiance of the export restrictions that were declared last year. A trade restriction list that, in theory, prohibits US suppliers from delivering specific technology to Huawei and SMI was also added to in 2019 and 2020. Although observers in China had speculated that SMIC might have manufactured the chip using equipment acquired before the October 2022 regulations, the research reveals that it had alternative means of acquiring the equipment from outside. The United States successfully closed a significant gap in its attempts to prevent China from obtaining sophisticated chip-making instruments by persuading allies Japan and the Netherlands, who own equally strong industries for chip-making equipment, to declare their own limitations on the transfer of the highly sought-after technology. However, the paper reveals how China accumulated weaponry by profiting from the delay between the US regulations from October 2022 and the Dutch and Japanese actions from July and September of 2023, respectively. The paper states that China purchased semiconductor manufacturing equipment worth $3.2 billion, RMB 23.5 billion, from the Netherlands between January and August 2023. This is a 96.1% increase over the $1.7 billion, RMB 12 billion, imported during the same period in 2022. In the first 8 months of 2023, China imported $13.8 billion, RMB 100 billion, worth of semiconductor equipment from all over the world. The report urges Congress to request an annual evaluation of the effectiveness of export controls on chip-making equipment to China, which is to be completed within 6 months by the General Accountability Office and then made public. The report does not specifically recommend how to address the gaps in US rules. The US-China Economic and Security Review Commission was established in 2000 with the purpose of recommending government action and submitting an annual report to Congress on the implications of the economic connections between the United States and China for national security. This article has been updated to reflect that the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission, rather than the House Select Committee on China, released the report. Huawei rejoins the smartphone market with a self-made chip, but the company is still suffering from US sanctions. The MIT Technology Review's China Report newsletter originally published this article on Chinese technology. Register to get it delivered to your inbox every Tuesday. The week ahead will be significant for US-China relations. Xi Jinping and Joe Biden will have a meeting in San Francisco on Wednesday to discuss trade, military matters, and other topics. He will be making his first trip to the US in half a decade. Indeed, a great deal has transpired since 2017. An amicable period in US-China ties came to an end. Too many turbulent events to mention here, including a trade war, pandemic, continuing technology competition, of course, spy balloon, and more. In this particular setting, Huawei, a Chinese telecommunications and technology giant, gained notoriety as a symbol of deteriorating ties. Being a national security problem, it was among the first Chinese tech companies to come under heavy scrutiny and become a target of sanctions. In fact, the US effectiveness in restraining Huawei has served as an inspiration for many of the ways it is presently enforcing sanctions in the US-China tech conflict. You can read more about my thoughts on the battle over semiconductors here and here. However, to believe that Huawei has failed would be incorrect. Not at all, in fact. During US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo's visit to China in August, Huawei startled the globe by launching its latest top phone, the Mate 60 Pro, without prior public notification. The main revelation was that despite the company's ban from obtaining 5G chips or cooperating with chip manufacturers outside of China since 2020, this phone actually has a brand new 5G chip. Thus, Washington officials and other China hawks became alarmed, believing that the corporation had managed to evade sanctions thanks to the comparatively sophisticated 7nm chip. Had it though? After dissecting the chip, researchers concluded that Huawei was the only company involved in its design and manufacturing. We've been curious to learn the truth about what actually transpired here, as well as the broader implications for the ongoing struggle for semiconductors and other technology. Thus, I recently had a conversation with Columbia University professor Harish Krishnaswamy, who specializes in chip design and telecommunications. In summary, Huawei has made a manufacturing breakthrough with the Mate 60 Pro, which allows it to regain its position in the smartphone market. Krishnaswamy informed me, it is obviously incorrect to assume that they are not a player because of the sanctions. He clarified that it wouldn't have been all that difficult for Huawei to develop a 5G chip in the lab because Chinese companies and researchers are not inherently bad at creating 5G chips. Producing a 5G chip in large quantities at competitive prices and excellent quality for usage in consumer goods is even more difficult. Advanced 5G chip production, according to him, is just a very large engineering endeavor that very few companies can pull off. Very few businesses have been able to properly produce 5G modem chips, including the American company Qualcomm, the Taiwanese company MediaTek, the South Korean company Samsung, and the chip company HiSilicon, which is a part of Huawei. Thus far, attempts to develop in-house 5G circuits have failed, even at tech behemoths like Apple and Intel. Thus, Huawei was forced to rely only on HiSilicon when US sanctions prevented businesses from providing CPUs for Huawei's phones. However, HiSilicon was also isolated by the sanctions from the worldwide network of factories, or fabs, as they are known in the semiconductor sector, which are essential to the production and testing of the goods. In 2020, HiSilicon ceased to receive chips from TSMC, a Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturer. This further limited Huawei's possibilities. Its only option was to use Chinese factories, but doing so was expensive and time-consuming. The process of redesigning, qualifying, and ramping production takes at least 3 years anytime you've designed a chip in a fab and then, for some reason, you cannot source that anymore and move to another company, adds Krishnaswamy, who also owns a chip company that collaborates closely with fabs. Subsequently, Chinese chip factories were subjected to sanctions, which further complicated matters for Huawei by preventing them from obtaining any advanced technologies for chip manufacturing. Thus, the industry was taken aback by how fast Huawei was able to turn around a design, move to a Chinese fab, manufacture the new chip, and get it to production rate when it released the smartphone with the new 5G chip earlier this year, according to Krishnaswamy. This was all while dealing with significant revenue losses brought on by sanctions. It is very impressive that Huawei has demonstrated its ability to do that, he remarks. In fact, the business has gained a great deal of national pride in China ever since it was revealed that it was producing its own 5G chips in Chinese factories with little help from outside. They see it as evidence that US sanctions don't always have the desired effect. They might compel Chinese businesses to adjust, relocate production back home, and catch up in technological areas where they have fallen behind, and that might eventually be advantageous to China. However, there are still challenges Huawei needs to overcome before it can regain its competitiveness in the high-end phone market, so it might be too soon for them to celebrate. According to Krishnaswamy, the ability to source it in large volumes and get the costs down over time really governs the long-term success of any company after they show proof of life. Basically, that they have a chip. Huawei is currently going through a reality check. A few months after the new model's release, the reality that getting a phone is still exceedingly tough for customers has dampened domestic enthusiasm. They are in scarce supply, which has resulted in months of back orders. In fact, Apple and Xiaomi, another Chinese brand, continued to sell the most phones as of this past weekend, which was China's version of Black Friday. In the end, Huawei has to challenge Qualcomm and Samsung to consistently produce better and more affordable CPUs if it is to restore its leading position in the smartphone industry, and that will not be easy to do. Even though it hasn't made it impossible thus far, the US chip blockage, which is always being strengthened and expanded, will only make it harder in the future. The US-China relationship may remain in a bitter winter for years to come unless this week's Biden-Tsai encounter yields some genuinely unexpected outcomes. In that situation, Chinese firms like Huawei will face many more challenges in the future, and a single advancement in chip manufacturing won't be sufficient. Do you believe Huawei can still make a dent in the world market for smartphones? Tell me what you think. That's where we wrap things up for the time being. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.